Deputy Stephen Donnelly, 10 minutes.
I'd like to say that I'm delighted to see the legislation that the Minister is bringing forward and recognise the work that Deputy Tuffy and the entire Education Committee did. And I think it's also worth acknowledging the Minister's using the pre-legislative process. I think this kind of debate is incredibly useful, and the report from the committee is incredibly useful, that we can give this type of feedback to the Minister and his officials before the draft legislation is published. So I just want to acknowledge that as well. I'm going to use two live examples in Wicklow to illustrate two of the things, two issues, one that the bill addresses and the other that I don't think it does address, and then go on to some of the things I like in the bill, and three areas I'd like to bring to the Minister's attention. The first issue, the first live example illustrates the geographic problem. There's going to be, thankfully, a new Educate Together, North Wicklow Educate Together school in Bray, which needs to serve all of Wicklow, parts of South Dublin, perhaps the post-primary school, yeah. But when the admission policy came out, it said, well, it's going to serve parts of South Dublin and Bray, but nowhere further south than Bray, which is a huge challenge for other parts of North Wicklow. Wicklow town itself has a primary Educate Together school, so I've been contacted by a lot of people saying, well, what are we meant to do? And I don't think the bill really addresses this problem, because there's probably some hybrid model to be found. For example, for Roman Catholic schools, where they're obviously all over the place, maybe there are geographic prioritizations allowed. But for other schools where they're much more sparse, like Church of Ireland or Educate Together, or a Muslim school or a Jewish school, to say, actually, no, in these cases, you've really got to allow these schools, cast the net very, very wide. The second live example I have, and the Minister and I have discussed this one, is the shortage of primary school places in the Greystones, Donnelly, Kilcool area. There are 9 schools. In theory, there is fantastic choice. They're all fantastic schools. We've Educate Together, Gael School, Church of Ireland, and Roman Catholic. The problem is, because the system is so completely overburdened, A, there isn't really any choice. Parents are just trying to get their kid in wherever they can. And secondly, the complexity of the system is very difficult. Now, the 9 schools all work together very closely, but the parents have to apply to all 9 schools and see where they get in. Now, the lack of capacity means this year we'll have 4-year-olds and 6-year-olds starting junior infants together, which obviously is one problem. But the other problem is there's huge complexity, there's a lack of transparency, and I'd like to stress it's not the fault of the schools. I think this bill does address that to a point and says that single admissions structures can be put in place for local systems. I think that'd be good. And Minister, hopefully you and I can sit down and discuss the issue of a new school, which is not an issue for today, but very pressing for the area. So there's various elements I would like to welcome. The first of these is Heads 8 and 9, which address the special needs issue. So I'm delighted to see that power is going to be given to the National Education Welfare Board and the National Council on Special Education to designate schools for kids with special needs. One thing you might want to look at, Minister, I thought the wording for the time being, so the heads say that this power will be given to the Minister or to the bodies for the time being. Might just be a little vague. Head 4, I think, is fantastic. I really like the idea of no fees or contributions being sought for admissions. We all know that there are some quite elite schools that charge a prohibitive amount of money for low and some middle-income parents to even put their kids on the waiting lists, and I think that's very, very welcome. And another is the move whereby essentially waiting lists before the year of admission are taken away. We have this crazy situation where essentially any parent moving into the Greystones, Donnelly, Kilcool area, with kids who were 7 or 8 or 9, should they absolutely, or even moving into the area when the kids were 4, so they'd no way of getting into the schools. So I think this is fantastic, and I also really like this preclusion of schools from interviewing the parents. We all know, there's obviously no data to back it up, but we all know that those interviews are used by some schools as a soft discrimination to say, oh, well, maybe little Johnny wouldn't be suitable for our school for whatever reason. So I applaud you, Minister, for bringing that in. There's three areas I want to highlight where I think the bill could possibly go further. And I guess for me, when I read the heads of the bill, I was really excited when I read Head 1 and the explanatory note on Head 1. I thought this is an incredible statement of intent. This is a fundamental shift from a highly discriminatory admissions system in this country to a fantastic, progressive, non-discriminatory system. And I guess as I read down through the rest of the heads, my enthusiasm ebbed. Because actually it left in lots of the exclusions. So I thought it was going to be a radical piece of legislation. It feels to me more like a modest and very sensible step in the right direction. The first is religion, religious exclusion. Now, I have no issue with religious patronage or religious ethos. I was educated by the Holy Faith nuns in Greystones, and I am very grateful to them for that education. So I have no issue with religious ethos in a school, but I have an absolute problem as a matter of principle and values with any school being able to say, we're not letting you in because you're not of our faith. Now, I think if a church wants to set up, run and pay for its own school, and it says we're only letting in Church of Ireland, Muslim, Roman Catholic, maybe there's an argument for that, but certainly not a state-run institution. To me, and actually as a private citizen before the last election, I ended up in a communication with the previous Minister for Education as I began to think about my own children and where they might be able to go. To me, if the state's saying to a kid, or to the parents of a kid, you're not coming in here because you are Protestant, is to me like saying you're not getting into the A&E in this hospital, or you're not getting into this university because you are Protestant or Roman Catholic or Jewish or Muslim or whatever you like. I just think it's a point of principle, and I think it's one that Ireland should move on from. And I would love to have seen in this bill allowing religious ethos, but saying you can no longer exclude a child from a state-run institution because of their faith or their parents' faith. I think that it was a good opportunity. The second is gender. This is a much more difficult one. Personally, I would like to see Ireland move away from segregated education.
In schools can't be compelled.
Okay, so that I guess is what I was disappointed with, because as I read it, the legislation read to me, or the heads read, you're not allowed to discriminate based on gender unless you discriminate based on gender. So I thought, well, okay, so what are we actually changing here? So
you'd be surprised at the amount of parents who still want single-sex schools.
Yeah, I'm very aware of that, and I think for that reason, Minister, I think it is correct that the legislation would not enforce co-education everywhere because there is a very strong parental preference for it. I think this bill maybe could be ambitious in laying the groundwork for moving to a case where you say, sorry, you can't come into this school because of your gender. It's a personal preference. I know other parents and other people do want segregated education. I would like to see Ireland move away from a case where we take boys and girls at 3, 4, 5, 6 years of age and separate them from the other sex for no obvious reason that I can see. The third issue, Minister, that I would like this bill maybe to go further is on fees, which is essentially a proxy for exclusion based on parental wealth. And again, I thought I read in the heads of the bill there will be no exclusion based on these things, but then later on it said, well, unless you already do it. So it kind of said you can't charge fees unless you charge fees. So you can't exclude based on parental wealth unless you exclude based on parental wealth. So I have a proposal, Minister. I personally am not in favour of the state pulling back funding from fee-paying schools. Mainly because it would end up costing the state more money at a time when we've got very little money. So the economics of it simply do not make sense to me. However, I do not want a situation where schools can exclude based on parental wealth. It's elitist, and in my opinion, it's bad for society. So I have something for you to consider. It's based on the model that Harvard uses. So Harvard has a very elegant system that says, well, they do charge fees. They charge a lot of fees. But they say, if you are accepted into Harvard, you will not have to turn the place down on financial grounds. They will either help you find a bursary, they'll help you find a scholarship, they will help you find zero or low interest fees.
In their back pocket in their fund. So if you can produce 60 billion, I'd be quite happy to play with that game.
They've a lot of cash. I know. I just thought I'll finish.
A couple of seconds because the minister took maybe.
Thanks very much, Chair.
A
I'll
couple of
finish on
seconds,
this.
that's all.
It's just something to tease out, Minister. I wonder, could we find a situation that says, if you are accepted into this school, a way will be found, maybe a means test of some description, whereby you do not have to say no because of the amount of disposable income that your parents have. The Harvard model is a bit of a stretch, but it's the same kind of thing. I'll just wrap up by saying, last sentence.
Very quickly.
Yeah,
very
that I salute you for what you're doing, and I think you could be more ambitious than you are being. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just trying to keep it as fair as possible, you know.